in 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 the CMC services during the morning, the emphasis on Anabaptist peacemaking. Last Sunday, uh, we heard from several of the conscientious objectors in our class who served in peacemaking activities during war times or when there was a draft. This Sunday, it's a real pleasure to welcome Emma Koop Liechty, who represents a movement of young adults who carry out the Anabaptist peacemaking values in a particular way. And we have the special honor of she's the granddaughter of Marge Liechty. So Marge is going to do the introduction this morning.
I must say, this is a first for me. I've never introduced one of my grandchildren before. And Emma is the fifth of, can't hear me? Can you now? All right. Gotta go like this. All right. Okay. Emma is the fifth of our grandchildren, and she now lives in Chicago, but she was born in Michigan and lived the first many, I think until sixth grade in Michigan, where her parents were in grad school at Michigan State and then later stayed on, both working at the university. So one of the things I remember about her grade school years was that I used to visit sometime at the elementary school where she went, and Emma, I think it was the Red Cedar School, and it was the most interesting place. I don't know how many nationalities, and maybe she can tell us later, but there were many, many just children from around the world because their parents were graduate students there, and they lived on campus too, and so they had a lot of neighbors that were graduate students. So it was a wonderful experience. The only down part was that she'd make good friends, and then they'd move back to Australia or China or wherever. But from there, then the family moved to India, and so she lived 3 years in India, and then back to the States. And during her high school years, I think she began junior year of high school at Goshen High, where she graduated, and then on to Goshen College, where she graduated. She did her SST in Nicaragua, and that's where she honed her Spanish school skills. What else was I going to say about that? But, and then she graduated from Goshen with a fine bachelor's in fine arts, I think, with an emphasis on graphic design. So her next step was to go to Washington, D.C. and work at the Berea Charter School, which was a school for immigrants to learn English, teaching adult immigrants English, and they were ones with families. So they could bring their preschool children there, and they also had a preschool for the children of the families that were learning English. So that was a great experience. And now she's moved to Chicago, and after 3 years in D.C., and is at Loyola University, where she works in the communications department, and begins tomorrow graduate school there. So she's a busy young woman. And I don't know that much about what she's been doing with Mennonite Action, so I'm anxious to hear it too, Emma.
Thank you all. I hope you can hear me. I'll try and speak up, but thank you, Grandma, for the introduction. It's also super special to have you give my introduction today, so that's really cool. I'm calling from sunny Denver, Colorado right now. I'm actually here for the wedding of one of my roommates when I was in MVS in Washington, D.C. So someone that I met through my volunteer service there, and a couple of our other friends and roommates are here. So it's really special to reunite with them and see them, and just another connection that taking part in a Mennonite organization has brought me, and it's really special. So yeah, I wanted to give a presentation today. I want to start with the disclaimer that I am by no means an expert on the conflict that's happening in Palestine and Israel. I mean, I know the basics, and it was enough for me to get involved. But I really didn't know much about it before October 7th. I really have to admit. So I think that I try to be an example to people of saying you don't need to be an expert on everything. You can kind of let other people be experts and guide your way, but there's a space for everyone to take part in standing up for what they believe in. So yeah, I'm going to start with my presentation. Let's see, let me try and pull it up.
Screen.
Share my screen. There we go. Can you all see it?
Yes.
Great.
Libby.
Okay. And pull this over here. Okay, so I jumped into a grassroots movement having done very little organizing before. I'd worked for several nonprofits that had done kind of some social justice work and had structures for that. But this is the very first time that I was jumping into something that really didn't have a structure. We were just kind of trying to do whatever we could to help the cause. And so I have this is an email that was sent out through Mennonite Action under my name. I wrote it in part with some very helpful copy editors, but and I added some things too because things have changed. This email went out in November as an invitation to our audience to join us for our very first mass call that was happening in December. And a lot has changed since then, but unfortunately a lot has stayed the same. So this is kind of just an overview of a little bit of who I am and why I jumped into this work. So I'm going to read it. If it will probably sound like I'm reading, but I've never organized before, never studied Palestine, nor visited Palestine. So how did I get involved? Throughout my life, my Mennonite upbringing taught me to raise my voice against injustice, war, persecution, and genocide. It's one of the reasons I felt called to jump into work with Mennonite Action. Growing up, I heard stories of how my Mennonite maternal grandparents escaped war and famine in the Ukraine in the 1920s and made a new home as refugees in Canada. I heard about how my paternal grandpa, Russ, I get emotional about these things, and his siblings all, it sounds like you all heard from some conscientious objectors, but I heard about how they all chose to do alternative service during the wars of the past century. And when I was in elementary school, the US invaded Afghanistan after 9/11, and my mom put me and my little sister in strollers, and we attended peace marches. So I feel like from a very early age, I was told stories and also shown by example ways that I can be a peacemaker. My eyes were open to my privilege and to Western colonialism during my family's 3 years in India with Mennonite Mission Network, and on my study abroad study service term with Goshen College in Nicaragua. I later saw firsthand the barriers in the US immigration system while I was working with immigrant families during my time with Mennonite Voluntary Service in Washington, D.C. All of these experiences have been crucial in shaping the global citizen and peacemaker that I am today. So in October, when I saw what Israeli forces were doing in Gaza, I felt distraught and scared. And I've grown up in the technological era. I'm on my phone a lot. So when the conflict started in October, I spent hours endlessly scrolling hopelessly through social media, seeing and reading and hearing accounts of what was happening in Gaza. I heard about I had heard in college a couple of times about the Israeli and Palestinian conflict, and had known people who had done peace work there through MCC's SALT program. But I really personally was not very in tune with the details of the conflict. And I feel like during the first month of this conflict, I heard a lot from Palestinian voices online and people who do know about the conflict, and felt as though I kind of had an accelerated course on Palestinian history just based on what I was learning online. And I immediately empathized with them. And I also immediately empathized with the Israelis who'd been taken hostage and their families in Israel as well. It just felt like a hopeless situation. And during that first month, I really didn't feel like I had an outlet or a way to do anything. I mean, I could share my opinion. I was sharing a lot of things on my Instagram about what was happening, but I didn't really know what to do. So I wanted to stand up against the violence that was destroying lives in Palestine. And I was distraught about the fact that the government and my tax dollars were supporting the violence. And I had seen that the Mennonite church had put out a statement about what was happening and a prayer for those involved. But I felt like my faith was prompting me into more tangible action. So I wanted to share a little bit about Mennonite Action. I'm going to kind of start from a high level of what our mission is, and then I'll get into the little bit of the nitty gritty about how it started and how I got involved. But first, I wanted to read to you the mission statement. So, Mennonite Action is a movement of Mennonites bonded by a common belief that we have a responsibility to use our voices as powerfully as possible for the cause of peace and justice. We are mobilizing fellow Mennonites and Anabaptists across the United States and Canada to use creative, nonviolent actions to demand a ceasefire, end the U.S. and Western-funded occupation of Palestine, and build for a lasting peace. We are Mennonites and Anabaptists rooted in values that our cultural or spiritual ancestors passed down: peace, justice, community, mutual aid, and service. We know that these shared values fly higher than any nation's flag. We refuse to turn a blind eye to violence and oppression, no matter who is perpetrating it, even and especially our own governments. We know that what's happening right now in Israel and Palestine is unprecedented and tragic. We draw on our Mennonite history of opposing war and providing aid and relief to Palestine and to the Middle East. We are making a choice to act together publicly as Mennonites in this critical moment. So that's kind of the mission that the leaders of the movement have put together and what kind of guides us in our work. So a lot of people ask questions. How was this formed? And how did I get involved? I've never organized before. I've never done any, I mean, I have always believed in a lot of social justice causes, and I felt like they've aligned with my faith and what my Mennonite upbringing has taught me. But I've never personally done a lot. I mean, I attended a couple of protests in Washington, D.C. when I lived there, but apart from that, I really have not done much planning or organizing when it comes to these kinds of movements. So the answer to both of these questions, how was Mennonite Action formed and how did I get involved, is word of mouth. And as things usually go, you hear about something from someone you know in your community who thinks you might be interested in and have the skills and also the values to support the cause. And so Mennonite Action has two co-founders, Adam Raymer and Nick Miller. Adam is the son of my my dad, Dan Koop, Liechty, his Goshen College roommate. So I've known Adam pretty much our whole lives. He's only a year younger than me. And we would visit his family in Madison, Wisconsin, where they live, every time we drove through. And so I've known Adam for a long time, and got to know him a little bit in Washington, D.C. as well when I was living there, because he studied politics and had an internship there. And so we spent a bit of time together. So he and I'll first go into how he and Nick started the organization, and then I'll go into how I got involved. Nick and Adam both had Mennonite upbringings and have had careers in political organizing, both in politics and in organizing separately. Adam has been working for U.S. representatives since he graduated from college. He had been working for Ilhan Omar in Minnesota, and I think he maybe worked for her for maybe 5 or 6 years, and then quit his job to start working for a new representative in Washington, D.C. And unfortunately, within the first 2 weeks of his job there was October 7th, when this conflict broke out in Israel and Palestine. He was immediately called by his faith, and knowing a bit about what has historically been happening in Israel and Palestine, to know that it was going to be a really bad situation in Gaza. And he ended up quitting his job within the first 2 weeks of starting there, because his new boss, the representative he was working for, would not take a stance on a ceasefire. So he was freshly unemployed and had time to go to protests, and he was spending a lot of time helping some of the protests that were already happening, and being led by Jewish protesters and organizers in New York City. He was living in New York City because he was working for a representative who is from New York. So he was partially working in DC and New York City, but he was living in New York. So he'd freshly moved there. He was participating in protests. And lo and behold, at one of these protests, he ran into Nick Miller, who is a Mennonite from Lancaster County and has been involved in grassroots organizing his entire adult career, and for various different causes. And Nick had also been drawn to New York to participate in some of these protests, and they ran into each other at one of these and had kind of formerly met, and both known that they were Mennonite. But when they met, they decided that they were wondering why Mennonites weren't out there on the streets. I think both of them come from families where grandparents have protested, and in the past, maybe during Vietnam or other conflicts, and they've said Mennonites have historically been at these types of things. Where are they? And how can we get people out? And how can we teach people about what's happening, and just get people involved? So they decided that they were going to just start small and see what happened. They formed a small group of about, I think it ended up being around 20 people to start out with, and it was just immediate friends and family that they knew of, and asked people either to share skills that they have, or purely just to be in community and reach out to people and tell people what's happening, both to have conversations about what's happening in Palestine, but also to share with them that, hey, there is this Mennonite movement that we're starting, and we would love for you to be involved. So Adam reached out to me in late October, and it felt like kind of a godsend, because I was feeling pretty hopeless. I was spending a lot of time online and just feeling really sad about what I was seeing coming out of Gaza. It was like, I still cry about it because it just was really terrible, and it really continues to be. Um, um, Lots of bodies and people that are hurt, people that are starving, and just hearing the accounts of people who are seeing their city that they've lived in and grown up in being destroyed. So really just terrifying. And Adam had seen on my social media that I had been sharing some things in support of Palestine. So he reached out to me and said, Emma, would you be interested in joining a group of Mennonites who are doing some organizing work around Palestine and protesting what our government is doing? And I immediately said yes. I was looking for an outlet, and I felt like this was exactly what I needed at that time. So yeah, and in the group of about 20 people, they were asking people for things like, are you a writer? Are you a copy editor? Can you help us write some emails to people to ask them to join us? Do you have a background in doing some social media work? Can you help post things online, saying that we're going to be having a meeting in December to talk about this? Can you, or I was, in the first week, I was sending emails to secretaries or office managers at every Mennonite church that I personally had any kind of touch point with. So I emailed College Mennonite. I emailed churches around Goshen that I had attended while I was in college, Berkey Avenue, other churches in Goshen. I was emailing anyone I could think of that would have access to putting something in a church bulletin or church announcements, asking them if they could share that this is happening and that people are welcome to join us. And this was happening with this team, and as we were doing that, we were slowly growing the team. We are slowly getting people who were volunteering to also help with this outreach, also help with sending emails, helping with pretty much anything you had the skill set for. And I really felt like I threw all of my time and energy into this for the first, I don't know, month that I was involved with it. I would get home from work and spend about 4 or 5 hours on my computer working on designing an Instagram post or a Facebook post, or helping to, I have a background in website design, so I was helping them update their website. I was helping do outreach. I was sending messages to people that I know that might be interested, people my age, people who are older, people who are my parents' friends and grandparents' friends, and just trying to reach out to everyone I knew to tell them that this was happening and that it was something I cared about, and hoped that they were also paying attention to, and invited them. And if they weren't paying attention, then I invited them to join anyway and offered this up as a learning opportunity. So let's see, I have another slide. So yeah, this is a little bit more about my specific role with Mennonite Action. So starting in November, I joined the communications team for Mennonite Action. My grandma mentioned that I studied graphic design at Goshen College, and I also had a minor in communication, and I have worked in a couple of different roles now. My job when I was at the School for Immigrants in Washington, D.C., my role was to help with the communication for the school. And I also briefly worked at a marketing agency where I learned some good skills about social media and emails and website design. So on the communications team, I think I've already mentioned a lot of these things. I was doing social media, I was doing design work, and I was doing website design. And I also send out texts. Sometimes you'll, if any of you are signed up already for Mennonite Actions correspondence, you may receive a text message, maybe about once a month or maybe twice a month, telling you that there's an upcoming event with Mennonite Action. I am the person pressing send on those and can see people's responses and respond. So sometimes people think it's just an automated text message that's going from a robot, but no, it's me pushing send. They have a great platform that helps me do it quickly, but I am the person on the other side of that. And sometimes it's other people too. It'll say my name if it's me. It'll say, "Hello, this is Emma." So you'll know. And yeah, I've pretty much very consistently been helping with these things since October. And then in February, I was asked to join the Mennonite Action Organizing Committee. For the organizing committee, we do kind of strategic and programmatic planning for the movement. We help to shape the mission of the organization and make sure that our actions and our meetings are staying on track with the mission. And we serve a little bit like the board of the organization. I say a little bit like the board because there is also a separate board that oversees Adam and Nick's work and they make the decisions about finances. So I'm not involved with any kind of financial planning or decisions when it comes to Mennonite Action. And I am not part of the team that oversees the leaders, but we work closely with them to help them make decisions about what types of things we want to be involved with, what types of things we would like to plan. And so that has been something that I've been a part of for the last 6 months. There's a group of about 10 of us that meet weekly. So for both of these committees, I meet weekly and help. And I'm kind of the liaison from the communication team on the organizing committee. However, I want to say that I've actually stepped down from the organizing committee and will be having my last meeting with them in the coming weeks because, as my grandma said, I'm starting grad school tomorrow. So I needed to scale back a little bit on my commitment to the organization, but I am still planning to be a part of the communication team going forward. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about some of the actual things that we have done since starting the organization. When we first started sending out messages and recruiting people in November, we were planning for an online Zoom webinar that focused on a little bit of what was happening in Gaza and also calling Mennonites to action. We had set an initial goal of having 1,000 people register for the webinar. And we, during our first call in early December, we had hit our goal of having over 1,000 people register. And during the webinar itself, we had over 850 people join us for our first Zoom call. And we really were just there to help guide people in prayer, teach them a bit about what was happening, and also call people to action. And after that initial Zoom call, we planned what we called the December Day of Action. This was in mid-December. And our strategy in doing this was to do our part in helping to build public pressure on our elected representatives to support a ceasefire. So in early December, we had a day of action where we called on Mennonites from across the country to organize different actions or meetings with their representatives in their local community. So for example, there was a group of Mennonites. I don't know if any of you participated in that, but there's a group of Mennonites that joined together out of Rudy Yakim's office in Mishawaka. I was at the protest in Chicago that called for asking our two senators, Tammy Duckworth and oh gosh, I'm forgetting his name now. So our other representative for a ceasefire. And here I added a photo. There's a group of about 60 of us in Chicago, and I think there were over 100 in Mishawaka. And on that day of action, we had 43 different actions in 43 different regions across the US and Canada. And we estimated that we had about 1,800 different people participate in that particular day of action. People took part in various different types of actions. Some held prayer services inside or outside of their reps' offices. Some people were able to meet with their representatives and directly ask them if they would support a ceasefire. And all of this was centered around coming forward and saying, we are Mennonites. We are a peace church. We do not believe in the things that are happening and that our government is supporting, and we would like you to stop. That is the basic gist of it, and asking their representatives if they would also support that they have constituents who are asking them this and would like them to support it. That was in December. And then in March, we had another local week of action. Both of ours in Chicago took place on the Federal Square. So that's why you'll see that sculpture there. In March, we had 25 different actions across North America. It was a little bit smaller, but I think people really leaned into it. In this photo on the right, you'll see kind of in the background that there are lines on the ground. We had close to, I think, 1,500 pairs of shoes that were laid out across Federal Square in Chicago. And I think that at that point in the conflict, each pair of shoes represented about 100 people that had been killed in Gaza. We did this action in coalition with a Palestinian organizing group in Chicago. And that was the case for a couple of different actions around the country that we were able at that point in the movement to make connections with other groups, other interfaith groups that were doing organizing and calling for a ceasefire. During that week of action, I think I said we had 25 different events that happened across North America. And similarly, it was often at people's representatives' offices, and we estimated that about around over 1,000 people participated in that action. The week of action also emphasized a need for aid to Palestine. This was around the time that the U.S. had pulled funding from the UN Relief and Works Agency, which was doing direct relief work in Gaza. Historically, the U.S. government has helped to fund that organization, and in March or late February, I think they pulled those funds, so no longer supporting that with our tax dollars. And it also happened, this action happened very briefly after several aid workers from World Central Kitchen, an aid organization that goes to places in need all around the world whenever any kind of disaster hits. Several workers had been directly killed and targeted by Israeli forces, even though they had been told that they were safe. So we had an emphasis during that week of asking our representatives to make sure that we were funding aid for food and medical relief in Gaza. And then we've also had two you can already see in my July one, I forgot to hide it. We had two different large scale national actions that have happened, which some of you maybe have seen online, that have happened since we started. In January of this year, on MLK weekend, we gathered in Washington, D.C. I think there were probably about maybe somewhere between 200 and 300 people that gathered in DC for a weekend of being together. But also on the Tuesday after MLK Day, we had an action in the Cannon House building, House of Representatives building, where we took part in civil disobedience. And this action was our way of protest was to sing hymns. 135 people gathered on the floor of the rotunda in that building and did a sit-in and sang Mennonite hymns, and stayed there until every single one of them had been arrested and taken out of the building, and kept singing throughout. So we had banners that said what our intentions were, why we were there, and we raised our voices through hymn, which is just about one of the most Mennonite things you could do. And so I think that was kind of a way that made people feel in community and safe, even though it was a really scary situation. A lot of people had never been arrested before. But we took part in that action, and yeah, it was really an amazing thing. I think between the first person and the last person, or maybe between entering and the last person being arrested, it was around an hour and a half. So that's how long it carried on. And at the same time, we had about 200 people, children and people who felt as though they couldn't sit on the floor, or people who just felt like they weren't ready to be arrested, who gathered for a prayer service outside of the building. And that was a permitted event. We had a permit with the city of DC, and so they were good to go. But they met outside at the same time as these people inside were being arrested. And I was inside the building. I was not arrested. I didn't take this photo, but I had the same viewpoint as the person who took this photo, up on the balcony of the rotunda. And I was taking photos and videos. And also I was doing a live stream on Mennonite Action's Instagram and Facebook accounts, for people to watch what was happening. And yeah, that is what happened in January. And following the arrests, the 200 people outside who had not been arrested took part in a lobbying day where they went and visited their representative's office and handed them each a copy of our petition, which at that point I think we had reached 5,000 signatures on it from across the United States, asking for a ceasefire and for aid in Gaza. And then most recently in July, we had a 10-day march from Harrisonburg to Washington, D.C., and it was 141 miles total. And we were marching to DC to take part in an interfaith coalition with other Christians, Jewish, and Muslim groups. And specifically, we're there and plan to be there that weekend to be counter protesters at the Christians United for Israel conference that was happening in Washington, D.C. CUFI, C-U-F-I, Christians United for Israel, is the largest Christian Zionist organization in the country. And we wanted to make our presence as non-Zionist Christians known and show that not all Christians are in support of what is happening in Gaza. That weekend we had, I actually don't have the exact numbers, but we also had another sit-in civil disobedience protest in the Hart Senate building, where our protesters sat in and sang hymns. It was a smaller group than the original one, and they arrested people much more quickly. I think because it was such a weekend of, they knew that people were going to be in town lobbying. I think that they had security really watching for protests. So, but it still made an impact, and we were part of a large coalition of other peacemakers from different denominations and different faiths. So I think that has been a really valuable thing that has come out of this too, is that we've built some really solid connections and relationships with other groups who are doing similar work. So the future of Mennonite Action. We will keep advocating for a ceasefire and an end to the occupation, calling for a free Palestine and lasting peace for all Palestinians and Israelis, and the release of hostages and an arms embargo. We will continue to urge Mennonites to keep taking action for peace and justice individually, with other Mennonites, and with other faith and secular groups who are working towards peace. We will keep organizing in our home communities. There are Mennonites organizing in Northern Indiana, so you all are invited to join. And we will keep continuing to offer ongoing learning opportunities through our Mennonite Action mass calls. Our September meeting will have the theme of racial capitalism and Palestine. And we haven't announced the themes for our October and November calls yet, but during those calls, we do anticipate to reveal upcoming campaigns and actions that we're planning. So that is something to keep an eye out for. And we also plan to have a presence at Mennonite conventions at Hope for the Future. We have plans to send some people to the Anabaptism at 500 conference in Switzerland, and also at the Mennonite convention next summer. And that is all for me. Do people have questions? I'm happy to answer them. Now we'll stop sharing my screen so you can see me.
Okay. Thank you so much, Emma.
You're welcome.
I love seeing the banners that say Mennonites for peace, and you've given just a stunning story of what grassroots is, and that's one thing I really appreciate about this organization. You know, the programs that conscientious objectors participated in were organized at an institutional level, sort of top down, and so that you are taking our values to a grassroots level is very moving. But questions?
A perfect comment. I was pleased to see the communication was your first program, and there's a footnote. MCC was organized in 1920, and its first program was communication. So newspapers and magazines were the prime release forums, and what you've outlined is just wonderful to use social media well and other forums in person, face to face. More power to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's been really moving to see people working on this level and seeing how something big can come out of just individual people throwing in whatever skills they have.
Emma, thank you very much for the presentation. Question I have, a couple of times you made reference to Jewish peace organizations in this, and I'm aware that this comes at a challenging time as Mennonites have been reckoning with a history that has been mixed and anti-Semitism and coming to terms with that. Could you say more about those connections with Jewish peace organizations and what kind of counsel to help separate out so it doesn't just simply become part of anti-Semitism?
Yeah, that's been a really important thing that we've kept in mind as we've been doing this organizing. We acknowledge that we do have that history, and at the same time, we find that this is not a matter of what the faith is of the people who are being hurt, but a matter of who has the power in these situations. And right now Israel has power. They have the backing of a lot of really large governments who are doing this work. And so if it was a secular government too, we would feel the same way. We are standing against the violence that's being done. And I know that this is so complicated. The making sure that we're honoring people who are doing the peace work in the Jewish communities as well, and that's been very important to us in this work. Adam and Nick have done a really wonderful job of making connections with two different Jewish peace organizations. Jewish Voice for Peace is doing a lot of organizing across the country, as well as If Not Now, which is another Jewish-led peace organization. And we do meet with them and ask them their opinions on our messaging, and making sure that we're following their messaging as well, and making sure that we're doing it in a way that is not anti-Semitic. So it is difficult, and I honestly feel very nervous and stuck by that a lot too. Like, it's something that I worry about personally, and want to make sure I'm not doing anything that will harm my friends who are. I have a lot of Muslim friends and a couple of Jewish friends, and I want to make sure that I'm doing my part in making sure they feel safe and loved as well. So I think I feel a little bit like I'm being led by people who know better than me on that subject, is kind of how I feel about that. So I hope that answers your question, but
Thank you.
yeah.
I'm Rachel Hartzler, and I've been in touch with Emma a little bit, but and many of you know, some of you have been there, we are doing something locally. Like, I wanted to go to DC in January, but for various reasons I couldn't, and I imagine some of you aren't up to protesting like some of the younger people did. But I can pray and I can sing, and so I've organized, and Donna Priest is helping with this initiative now, to pray and sing and be together in a circle over in the gathering rooms once a month. Now we were more often. We met here on January while they were in DC and prayed for them, for their safety and effective witness, etc. And so I welcome you to join us. It'll be September 17th that we do that again. And then, as you heard, the potluck this week will be the Michiana area. But here at CMC, we're also taking initiative, and it's open to everyone.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, I think building that community around prayer and support is really important, as well as taking part in the action itself. I encourage you to do both. I think we're at a crucial time when it's important for us to be being seen, as well as having those times of community and prayer. So I really appreciate that support as well. And we do hear about it and recognize it on a national level too. We definitely have appreciated that.
Member of those Dick Statsfus, I would enthusiastically commend you for what you are doing. You and the other founders have sacrificially given of your time and resources. What is your budget and where can we send money?
That's a good question. You know, I actually don't hold any of the strings to the budget and don't actually know what the budget is. So I can't answer that question, but I can tell you where to give money. I would encourage you to go to the Mennonite Action website. It's MennoniteAction.org, which I could also maybe send to some people afterwards so that you all can get it via email. But there are very prominent buttons on our website for where to give. We are entirely grant and donation based. We only have 2 staff. Adam and Nick are now full-time staff for us. And otherwise everything is volunteer based. So donations are very important and very welcome. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad to put the link on the email that John Hertzler sends out
Great.
weekly. So
Sounds
people
good.
have a look. Any other comments or questions? Okay.
I'd like to know what kind of conversations, if any, you were able to have during the time at the Capitol. Do lawmakers listen to you? Do they tell you to go away? Do they get defensive? Are any minds changed? What's the quality of that interaction?
Yeah, so it's hit or miss. I do know there was a senator in Wisconsin, Tammy Baldwin, I think, who called for a ceasefire a couple of days after Mennonites visited her office in Madison. I'm not sure of any results that came directly out of our action in DC. I think we were mostly there kind of to make a statement. And we know that people won't necessarily be changing their people, as in our representatives, may not be changing their mind. We hope for that, and it would be great if it happens. But we're also there to be a Christian presence and to show other Christians across the country that this is something they can stand up for. Not only Christians, anyone. This is something that they can stand up for and make their voice heard. And so we're just trying to add to the growing number of voices who are putting that pressure on our representatives. So we're a small enough group that we may not personally change the representatives' minds, but we might be able to change the minds of some other normal people around the United States who can help us eventually put enough pressure on our representatives. When we were visiting the offices in DC, most of the time, I actually do know the Senate was in session, or both were in session. The Congress was in session while we were there. So they were actively inside the Capitol in the Senate room, in the House chamber, Senate House chambers, making decisions while we were going to their offices. So we were meeting with their staff primarily. And their staff, I have to admit, I was mostly meeting with more progressive Democrats. Those were the representatives' office that I visited. They would just listen and say thank you for sharing, and that they would pass on that we visited to their boss, but didn't often give any type of indication of whether or not they would change their mind. So, but yeah, I think really we're just hoping to be a positive presence for other Christians and other people,
including ourselves. You're a witness to all of us, to the Anabaptist community. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Do you want to say what you'll be what your studies will be beginning tomorrow?
Sure, it's a little different. I'm starting a master's of education, specifically in higher ed administration. So I've been working at Loyola University for the last almost 2 years now. This fall will be 2 years, and between my time at Loyola and I'm an administrative assistant for the School of Communication. So I'm not doing communication work. I'm doing administrative work for students who are studying in the field of communication. And between that and my time working in Washington, D.C. at the school there, I've really loved being in educational spaces and specifically working with adult learners, which has been the case. Some people may not think college age students are adult learners, but they are, and we consider them adults. They're all over 18. So working with adult learners, and I decided I have a very great coworker who has also done a Master of Education and encouraged me, as well as my family and others, to look into this degree, which I think will have some good, positive leadership and programmatic skills that I can learn that can go across working in education in the future, but also maybe other nonprofits. Is kind of my hope. The program has a strong emphasis on social justice, so I'll be doing a lot of work on learning about dealing with that in educational settings as well. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, it's a little bit of a change for me, but I'm looking forward to it. I've already had some homework to do, and it's been very interesting.
Well, thanks again for carving time out for this presentation.
Of course.
And safe travels today as you travel back to begin
Thank you.
studies tomorrow. All the best. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.